I came out early to snorkel, and the waves said absolutely not. But then I found a monk seal, so honestly, it worked out. Welcome to Maui. It's the second largest island in the Hawaiian island chain. It's also nicknamed Valley Isle because of its lush landscapes amidst its volcanic peaks. In this episode, we're going to do a deep dive into its cultural history, as well as see how it's much more than postcard beauty. Can't wait to get me some snorkeling in. Here's the problem. Waves. Very unpredictable. Sometimes it's really calm, and then other days it's like this. This is why I always recommend you just getting out and exploring. You never know what you're going to see. This morning I went exploring, trying to find a place to snorkel, and I got something even better. A Hawaiian monk seal. She's actually molting. That's when they shed their outer layer of skin and fur. It looks dramatic, but it's totally normal. And seeing one is really rare. There are only about 400 Hawaiian monk seals left in the islands. So this monk seal has a name, Lana. She's about 22, and she's come to this particular beach 3 years running. She's not me, that's for sure. She can stay still for, it seems like for hours. Bye, Lana. I head to Dragon's Teeth, some wild formations made possible because the West Maui volcano erupted thousands of years ago. Lava flowed down here and was pushed back by the strong winds and the crashing surf. Nearby is the largest labyrinth on the island that was just installed in 2005 by some anonymous person. It was built for contemplation and spiritual reflection, and what better place than here? On land that's culturally significant to Native Hawaiians, near an ancient burial area where many ancestral remains are buried. Maui is breathtakingly beautiful, partly because it's seen some of the harshest forces nature can throw at it. But those forces have a downside, which contributed to some ferocious wildfires in 2023. Those wildfires devastated the 19th century town of Lahaina, and that history is far from being the only loss.
We're a nonprofit that started in 2024, just after the wildfires, because we saw a gap of finances. You know, the people were barely going to be able to afford to build their home. So we knew trees were probably not going to be their priority.
Why trees? Why is it so important?
When you go into town and you look and you go, wow, there's only like, say, 1,000 trees left out of 30,000 trees. It's kind of depressing. This is with United Airlines and Arbor Day Foundation. They did these trees and those trees, but all these trees are going to go to people's yards.
Why trees are so important to Maui? Is it integral to the culture here?
We are sticks and stones culture. You know, your sticks being the trees, and that's where we get a lot of our medicines, our tools. A lot of our deities are the trees. So we have to respect those culturally. But it's also food security. Us being an island and importing so much stuff, we want to make sure that we have ample food. We import almost 80% of our food, which leaves only 20% grown locally. More like 80% of Lahaina got impacted. Yeah, we know that about 90% of the trees died. So our goal is 30,000 trees. People from all over the United States have been donating to this program. It's rooted in aloha, it's rooted in Hawaiian values, and we want people to take those same Hawaiian values and use those in your own community because they mean so much. Aloha is to love unconditionally because we exist and we're lucky that we can breathe air. By using these, these Hawaiian values, it shows that the community can rebuild together as opposed to adversarially or apart. And it's easier for us to come together as a group and make a project like this happen as opposed to one person trying it or one individual group.
We're here at the Lahaina Memorial to remember all those who died here during the wildfires of August of 2023. Those fires were so devastating that the world heard about it. And the recovery continues, supported by both the local community and people around the world. For 145 years, sugarcane and its cultivation was a major industry here on Maui. But in 2016, the last sugar mill closed, leaving behind a cultural and historical legacy. Luckily for us, there's a museum called the Sugar Museum that captures all that. Sugarcane isn't native to Maui. It was brought here by the first Polynesian settlers. But the commercial sugar industry that came later transformed the island on a completely different scale. Maui's weather patterns and topography meant that growing sugarcane wasn't easy in the dry parts of the island. At its peak, sugarcane covered about 8% of Maui's total land area, yet it dominated almost the entire Central Valley. If you lived here in the 20th century, it felt like the island was one continuous sugar field, stretching from the mountains to the sea. To grow sugarcane, you have to have water, but the drier parts of the island didn't have enough. This is where innovations came into play. A network of more than 160 miles of ditches, tunnels, and siphons across the mountains. The American Society of Civil Engineers eventually named the East Maui irrigation system a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark, the same recognition given to projects like the Panama Canal, the Hoover Dam, and the Golden Gate Bridge. It earned that not because of size, but because of difficulty. Without this system, there would have been no sugar industry in Maui at all. Sugar reached its peak on Maui between the 1930s and the 1960s. At one point, nearly the entire Central Valley was sugarcane, about 36,000 acres. But to make the industry so dominant, it took thousands of people. Plantation work was some of the hardest labor in Hawaii. In the early 1900s, workers earned about $15 a month, the equivalent of a few $100s today, for 10 to 12 hours a day in the fields. By the 1930s, it was still only about $1 a day. Women worked, children worked, and the camps were built so families rarely left. The sugar industry needed workers, and it attracted workers from all over the world. And by 1932, 70% of them came from the Philippines, like my parents. In the early days, plantation camps were segregated by ethnicity: Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, Chinese, Hawaiian. Each camp was its own self-contained world with its own store, school, church, and traditions. The companies designed it that way to keep workers divided. But over time, those boundaries softened as families intermarried and communities grew together. This is where Hawaii's multicultural identity really began. While it's been years since the last mill closed down, you can still see remnants of some of the places from that era in Maui's history. It feels so eerie now, like a true ghost town, still frozen in time. I hope you got at least a little sense of the history, the culture, and even the community spirit that's here in Maui. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Mary Goes Round the World. Let's wrap with this week's travel tip. We are at mile marker 0 of the road to Hana. It's the beginning of a 64-mile drive around Maui. 600 curves, 650 one-lane bridges. In return, you get these unparalleled views. Just so you are fully aware, I didn't do it because I'm not the greatest long-distance driver, and I just assume finish this vlog in one piece. That's my tip of the week for you.